How you doing, everyone? Come on, it's Signal, come on. Woo! So I'm here today, very happy to be here today to introduce Mr. Tony Hawk, the best skateboarder on the earth, world champion, 12 years in a row, and also he continues to tour and skate, and he's the most recognizable action sports figure on the planet. Today, he's here to talk to you about how he's built a brand through determination and has stayed true to his vision. He's not only built a billion-dollar video game franchise, but he's also created the Tony Hawk Foundation, which I'm very passionate about as well, as you can see, that helps build skate parks in low-income areas in all 50 states. And I'm very grateful to be up here to introduce one of my role models, just like everyone else here, Mr. Tony Hawk.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. You might expect me to talk about my career in skateboarding, but actually I'm a leading expert in Twilio Flex, so I'm going to give you guys all the information you need to know. No, I'm not at all. In fact, I just got sabotaged with a live coding session. I don't know if you guys saw it, where they actually made a "Is this Tony Hawk or not?" app. It was very awkward, and let's just pretend it doesn't exist at this point, okay? I'm here to talk about basically my career. My name is Tony Hawk. I'm 50 years old, and I'm a professional skateboarder. That sounds more like the opening line to an intervention, but for someone who can't give up skateboarding, I can't give it up, but I still love it truly. And I started at a time when skating was very small. Skating was sort of considered a fad, a trend, a toy. My older brother was a surfer. He had some skateboards. That was the extension of surfing. And I was about 9 years old one day, and I played all the other sports. I played baseball and basketball, and I was super scrawny. I was really small for my age, so at 10 years old, I looked like I was 6. And that didn't bode well for getting picked for Little League, but I persevered. And I started skating by just asking my brother if I could ride one of his old boards. And he said, yeah, go ahead. And so I took the board, I stood on it, I rode down the alley, and I kept yelling back, how do I turn, how do I turn, how do I turn? And then I ran into the fence, got a splinter in my hand, this is true, picked up the board, turned it around, and kept yelling at him. He said, you gotta lean. And then I was leaning, and I was cruising, and that's when you would expect some great epiphany, and like I would hear bells, and it didn't happen at all like that. I just sort of put it back and said, okay, I did it. And he gave me that board, actually. And so it was my way of almost fitting in with my friends and the people in my neighborhood. Like a lot of kids skated back then because it was the trend. And so I started skating with them in the alley, and I would just use it to go to and from school. And then not long after that, probably a few months, I got invited to go to the skate park for the first time. And when I went to the skate park and I walked in and I saw these older guys literally flying out of empty swimming pools, I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do. That's when I had my epiphany. And as frightening as that seems, I was always, I don't want to say I was a daredevil, but I was always trying to do stuff that was sort of beyond my age or size, including all the other sports. And so when I finally got there and saw that, I thought, I want to do that. And that's it. And I started devoting all my free time to at least trying to get rides to the skate park. I would go at least once a week. That was when my brother would pick me up from college and take me there. That was my treat. And started trying to figure out how to fly like these guys were flying. When I finally started getting near the top of the bowls, that's when I got my first concussion. And that was probably the pivotal moment for me, because they literally found me laying in the bottom of the pool. I know concussions are a hot topic right now, but I was young, and they found me laying there. My front teeth are gone. I woke up in the ambulance, and my first thought was not, oh my God, what have I done? I'll never skate again. My first thought was, I should probably set up my feet differently when I'm doing rock and rolls, because that didn't work out the way I did it. And then that was it. I was off and running. And not long after that, I quit playing all the other team sports. literally the year my dad was appointed Little League is the year I quit. My dad was appointed president of our Little League in our area. And I'll never forget him picking me up at the skate park to go to baseball practice. And he pulled me out, like almost physically, we gotta go, we're gonna be late. And I didn't take my pads off on the way home, because we used to have to wear pads at the skate park, and then walked up to Little League practice with my knee pads on still, and just told him I didn't want to leave the skate park, I don't want to play baseball anymore. Luckily, he'd already been through 3 older siblings of mine in the 70s, and gone through a whole gamut of experiences with them, and he was supportive, and I got very lucky. And so he said, yeah, if this is what you really love doing, you should follow it. I did not think I was choosing a career at the time. I was 10 years old, and skating was, I was on my way up. My interest level was peaking with skating as its popularity was in rapid decline. All my friends quit skating at the time. I just kept doing it because I really loved what it brought to me. It brought me a new sense of self-confidence. It brought me a whole new crew of friends that were all different and very unique, and as far as I was concerned, really interesting and progressive. And they didn't follow the norms. They weren't on teams. They weren't listening to the pop music. They were all just doing very what I thought cool stuff. It set us apart in terms of being sort of I guess considered weirdos, and people thought it was like skating was just not cool. That was the bottom line. If you were skating then, you were the furthest down from cool on the totem pole of the school in terms of jocks and nerds, you know, math experts, and then skaters, somewhere around here. Coders fell in somewhere in between there, but definitely above skateboarding. So I started going full on and really started sort of creating my own style of tricks because I was so little that I didn't have the bulk, I didn't have the strength or just the body style to do these big aerials, because those guys were really using their weight to throw themselves around. And it was all about your style, and you had to look like you were surfing, you had to be cool. And I was this little scrawny, I was literally wearing elbow pads for knee pads, because the knee pads didn't fit me. And I was just this one little pad, you know, almost like I was wearing a Smurf costume. And I just started creating my own tricks. And I remember the first trick that I ever made up at the time, I was about halfway up the wall in this pool, and I reached down and grabbed my board, jumped up, and then spun it around 180. It was called a backside varial at the time. No one had ever done it before. I thought it was cool, and I was largely made fun of it. I was largely made fun of for doing that, for doing something that they considered circus tricks. Like the cool clan was all about grinding the top of the bowl and just trying to look cool, really. And here I was coming in with my little, they called me a robot. And I started getting some recognition. I started winning some of the skate contests. The only way to get recognized at the time was to enter a competition. There's no YouTube. The magazines only cared about you if you were in the contest, so I just started working my way up. I remember the very first contest I went to, they told me to write down my routine, and I had never done that before, so I just started writing down these weird name tricks and whatnot. I remember falling on the trick that I took for granted at the time, and not performing to my best that I thought. And at the end of the competition, I went up to one of the women organizers. I'll never forget, she had a clipboard, so I knew she had all the names, and I knew she had the results. And I said, oh, I want to know how I did. Well, what division are you in? Oh, I'm in the 12 and under. Okay, and what's your name? Tony Hawk? Okay. Then she pulls up 1 sheet, 2 sheets, 3 sheets, 4 sheets, and I'll never forget watching her finger trail all the way down. Second to last name was my name. She tried not to let me see it because she knew I was crushed. And she's like, oh, honey, I'm sorry, you didn't do very well. And that was my first competition experience. But it gave me some, if anything, it gave me some clarity in terms of where I stood and what I was doing. And I just wanted to be considered legitimate for what I was doing. I was very young. Like I said, I didn't think I was choosing a career in it. I was just having fun with it. But at the same time, I was very much part of this community that was already sort of an outcast society. Skating wasn't cool. So I was an outcast within this outcast society. And I feel like that was my very first taste of haters. Truly, this society that I love so much, this community that meant so much to me, that gave me a sense of identity, was basically casting me out. And I stuck with it. I found some friends that were sort of the same age. They had the same sort of attitude of learning tricks and whatnot, and we just sort of we supported each other. And eventually, I started getting my strength. I started getting much more confidence, and I started winning some of the amateur events. And then I found myself with a sponsor. And when that sounds glamorous in today's society of endorsements and athletes and whatnot, but all that meant was that sometimes they would send me skateboards in the mail. A lot of times they were used by the pro of the team, Mike Smith. I would get hand-me-downs from Mike Smith. That was how I was sponsored. And eventually the boards stopped coming, and I didn't understand what that meant. But at the same time, I had one. I was riding, so I didn't really complain. And then not long after that, Stacy Peralta, who was largely considered the most progressive skater in his day, had accumulated the best team at the time, absolutely the best skate team, the Bones Brigade. And the team that I would read about in the magazines. They were already mythological. They were bigger than life. They did tricks. I mean, I was trying to emulate some of the tricks they were doing. Even though they were doing them way above the pool, I was doing them halfway up, but that was my inspiration. He called me and said, hey, Tony, I heard that Dogtown went out of business. And I said, oh, that's why I don't get skateboards anymore, I guess. And he said, well, I'd love to talk to you about riding for the Bones Brigade. And little did I know, that really would set the course for the rest of my professional career as a teenager. And as I guess as crazy as that sounds, that I turned pro when I was 14. When I turned pro, that was basically me filling out an entry form to a competition, and it said, what category are you in? Amateur or pro? And I ticked the pro box, and that was it. I was pro. There was no champagne. There was no contracts. All it meant was I was competing against a different level of skaters, and that I was vying for $150 first prize cash. At 14, in 1982, 150 bucks, huge. I didn't get first place, obviously, but you know, the carrot was dangling, and I was excited, and a lot of my peers were moving up in the competition category as well. So I turned pro. I found my way. I started learning how to skate the other types of terrain. I was really good. I was considered only good at my home park, which is Del Mar Skate Ranch. I started branching out. I started purposely going to these other parks and learning how to skate them, and eventually I started winning a lot of the events. And at a time when suddenly skateboarding was on the rise again, there was the element of cool, I don't know, cool, but the idea that skating was so different, and it was the 80s, and it was hairdos, and it was graphics, and I know skating started to permeate the mainstream a little bit. I think the best example is Back to the Future. So many of my generation started skating because they saw it in Back to the Future. My generation, maybe the generation after me. But that was it, and people started to recognize it, and suddenly we found ourselves as the Bones Brigade in our late teens making six figures, and the sky was the limit. Like we thought we were invincible. We were just going and riding the wave. And I remember when I graduated high school, my parents were asking me, were encouraging me to obviously stick with school and figure out what I want to do. And at some point I realized that I was already making more money than my teachers. I had purchased a house while I was still a senior in high school. I made it challenging to get to school on time over the last couple months, and I realized this career fell in my lap. I never imagined skating for a career. I didn't set out. The dream wasn't, I'm gonna make it rich, I'm gonna make it famous. Like, that dream didn't exist. No one had ever done anything like that. So we didn't imagine that that was possible. We were just trying to create a dream in some ways. We just were happy to do it. We couldn't believe we were getting paid for it. We were traveling the world. About the time when we thought that it was never going to end, it ended very quickly. Skateboarding suddenly became almost as unpopular as it was in the early 70s, mostly because the skate parks were drying up because they couldn't afford the liability insurance anymore. And there was less interest in skating, but more so they just couldn't afford to stay open. So people had no place to do it. They kind of grew out of it, so to speak. And I found myself with 2 mortgages, a child on the way, and my income shrinking by half every month. And that's not a joke. Like it was in rapid decline. So I thought the smartest thing to do would be to start a skateboard company. Because I love skateboarding and I wanted to be in it. And I believed that having been through a cycle of popularity sort of twice in my day, in my early 20s, I thought if we start a skateboard company now, when I say we, it was another pro skater and I had decided to pool our funds together. If we start a skateboard company now and skateboarding does come back around in popularity, we could establish ourselves here at sort of the lowest entry point of cost to be one of the best brands. And we both took the plunge. I sold my second house for what I owed on it, took out a second mortgage on my other house, and he and I just bit the bullet, and we just started doing it. It was he and I and one sales guy, and we were literally the ones calling shops, begging them to buy our stuff. I got put on a very strict budget of living. I was living off of Top Ramen and Taco Bell and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches almost exclusively for about 2 to 3 years. That's absolutely true. Like I'm not trying to make up some ridiculous story. We would, in order to promote the brand, I started making videos, and this was a time when skate videos were not prolific. And my big marketing technique was to we would send $5 for a video on our ads that we bought for. The skate magazines were very cheap then to buy ads space. So we got the back cover for $400. I'll never forget that. And on the back cover, we wrote the address and said, send $5 for a skate video. All of a sudden, these envelopes started pouring in with $5 bills in them. And we made VHS tapes, and we made a video. Today, it's called Feasters. It's terrible. I mean, it's beautiful and terrible. I'm proud of it, and I cringe at it. And we were renegade. We used Beatles songs in it. Like there was no licensing. Who's going to care? We sold 400 of them. Like, what are they coming after us for? For the $5 for the postage. But it was a great marketing tool, and it really did sort of spread our word. And eventually, skating started to come around. We would go out and promote our brand by calling up skate shops and saying, "Look, you'll get our whole team there for $500 if you can just provide something for us to skate." That worked about half the time. Every time we'd show up, they would give us whatever they could. So it was usually just a couple $100s. We would use that money to buy gas, to buy Taco Bell for the crew, and to get one hotel room for 5 dudes. And if you want to know how that works, if you take a hotel room with 2 twin beds, you take the mattresses off the beds, put them on the floor, and then you can have 1 person to a box spring, 2 to a mattress, 1 to a box spring, 2 to a mattress. It's disgusting. But it worked. And it's funny because I look back on that with fondness. It was really fun. We were just doing it. It was so DIY. But at the same time, we got to skate. Like I was an adult. I had a child and I got to skate for a living. So to me, that was living the dream. Not long after that, ESPN came up with this crazy idea that they want to throw all the extreme sports together. And I had never heard the term extreme up to that point. And I didn't know that people thought what we did in parallel with rock climbing or sky surfing or bungee jumping. I didn't really connect those things, but they said, it's all these fringe sports, we want to put them together, and we're going to do it all in this one event. And so they created the Extreme Games, now called the X Games. And it felt very experimental. In a lot of ways, it felt exploitive. The coverage was really strange. The courses were pretty bad. But I agreed to do it because I felt like skating has such, it has such a rooted core of cool. I don't want to say cool. It's more like the foundation of skating was that of people who truly had passion for it and truly wanted to progress and weren't doing it because they thought it was cool. And so I felt like that attitude would shine through on this programming. The first Extreme Games was literally bungee jumping, sky surfing, eco challenge, rollerblading, skateboarding, but we just stuck to our guns. We're like, we're going to represent, or I did anyway, and represent skateboarding as best we can. As the games developed, as they evolved, skating became sort of one of the top events, and a lot of the other stuff just fell by the wayside, including, obviously, bungee jumping. But there was something there, and suddenly we saw Birdhouse sales finally take off. I don't want to say take off. We were finally paying our rent. And we were finally actually taking some income from the brand. So for us, it was huge. And I felt validated in my attitude of dealing with the X Games and sort of jumping through all the hoops of how they wanted to program and how they wanted to present it. And it was a blast. And so skating started to have a new resurgence. I got approached by a PC developer who wanted to do a video game at the same time. And he said, hey, I have a really crude engine, and I'd like you to come pitch this with me to some video game publishers and console manufacturers. And I loved video games as a kid. There were very few skating games growing up. 720, Skate or Die. I bought a Commodore 64 so I could play Skate or Die. I'm really old. So he had this crude engine, and so I just went with him. I'd never done pitch meetings or anything like that, and so we actually went to Nintendo because luckily one of the administrators there skated, so he got us in the door, and we presented it and just kind of fell on blank faces. It said, I don't know, this, it's cool, but skateboarding isn't really big, and then we went to another publishing company, rhymes with Fidway, and they basically, we had the hardest time there. In fact, that was the most discouraging meeting for both of us. We just came up against skateboarding is not popular. Why would anybody play a video game about skateboarding? How could this be fun? We wouldn't sell this. And we both just sort of walked away dejected. He said, look, I don't have time to try to fight this anymore, to try to pitch this. I got to actually make a living. And I said, all right, cool, thanks. And that was it. About 6 months later, I got a call from Activision. And they said, hey, we heard you were pitching a skate game. I said, well, kinda. And they said, well, we would like to, we're going to make a skate game. We'd like your input on it. Why don't you come look at what we're doing? And you might have heard me tell the story on the other stage earlier, but I went up to Activision looking like a skater in those days with a bunch of suits in a boardroom, and they handed me a controller, and then on the screen was Bruce Willis with a gun strapped to his back on a skateboard riding through a desert because they had just done a game called Apocalypse starring Bruce Willis. And so they had his character, but they knew the engine would lend itself to something with more motion like skateboarding. Apocalypse failed miserably, but we luckily got that engine, and I knew instinctively right there that this was the right concept. The controls felt intuitive. I felt like with my input, I could make it more authentic. I could represent skateboarding well in it, and I signed on basically right then. I had no idea what that would mean. I didn't know that was going to change my life completely, forevermore, and I would be synonymous with video games. I was just excited to make a game that represented skateboarding and one that skateboarders would be stoked to play. That was the goal for me. The goal for me was that skateboarders would be inspired to go buy a PlayStation. because they thought our game was cool. That was it. Like if that's what happened, then it was a great success. I knew something was happening as we got closer to the release of the game, when Activision called me and basically offered me $500,000 for future royalty buyouts. $500,000 didn't even seem like tangible amount to me at that point in my life. It's like if someone says $1 trillion billion. And I was very tempted to take it. I actually, things were, like I said, things were picking up. Birdhouse was actually cranking. I had just bought a new home. And I said, you know what? I feel pretty good about where I'm at. I'd rather just see where it goes and let it roll, which was by far the best financial decision I've ever made in my life. So as the game was about to get released, it was 1999. It was my last year of, I decided it was going to be my last year of competing because at that point in my life, I had literally competed 20 years. And I was trying to figure out how to sort of ease my way out of competition without just being like the fading old guy. I was 31, but, and so I told myself, you know, I'm going to try to make it count with my standings this year. Through that year, they started having best trick events in other events. There was not just the X Games. There was the Hard Rock Series. There was a couple of Vans events, and I started entering the best trick events because they would hold them. They say, okay, you guys get 20 minutes. Best trick counts. And at that point in my life, I had some tricks that I would do sort of to get in the standings, and then I would end up trying 900s because it's something that I had been trying for almost 5 years prior to that. Actively, I'd been trying it for 10 years, but for the last 5, I was getting a little closer. It broke my rib, but I felt like I almost had it. And when the X Games came along, I was very methodical in what I had planned for that event because I knew that was going to be probably the biggest, best trick event at the time, and I got to be strategic on it. So I had 2 tricks in mind. One was the cab 360 varial. I'm sorry, I'm not going to explain that, but basically the board goes around twice and I go around once. And that was, if I made that, then I was going to do a varial 720, which is a 720 spin with my board, do an extra 180. That was my best trick at the time. That was literally my best trick. And I made my varial 720 about halfway into the event, and that was it. I really didn't know what to do then. And the announcer, I'm sort of piecing this all together these days now because it was a while ago and there was a lot of craziness. But the announcer said, "Let's see a 900," because he had seen me try it prior to that. And I remember the first thought was, what? Now I can't. Like, I've never done it. I'm gonna, and I'm most definitely gonna get hurt. That was without question in my head. Like, all right, here we go, live TV. And I started trying it, and about the 4th or 5th try, it always takes me about 10 to 12 tries to get one. About the 4th or 5th try, I could feel my spin consistent. I could tell where I was in the air, and I started to see my landing, and that was always the most difficult part for me was spotting where I was going to land because I would spin so fast and I would just sort of throw it down and hope for the best. And like, it's like a spastic gymnastic, like, you know, just like, oh, am I on my feet? No, I'm not. Oh, I'm going to break my thing. And then when I first set it down, I was leaning too far forward, which was my big mistake always. And I crashed, and I sort of survived the crash, and then I thought, I wonder if I could try to shift my weight mid-spin. And so I did that on the next attempt, and I fell backwards. And for me, that was the moment, because I had never fallen backwards on the landing. I'd always been leaning too far forward. That's how I broke my rib originally. And so I sort of split the difference, and the next thing I know, I was riding away. And I did 900, and that was... And it's so weird to be here talking about it and to have any sort of accolades for it, because when I learned 720s before it had ever been done, I did that in 1985 on a backyard ramp outside of Stockholm, Sweden, with 4 people watching me skating and just kind of like, cool. Like, that was 2 spins, awesome. And the first time I tried a 900 was on a different backyard ramp outside of Paris, France, in Bourges, France. And I don't know why it was so international, but and I tried my first 900 there and lost grip of my board, just sort of splatted on my back, and there was no like cool. There was just like, ugh. So it's just weird to have lived through that and to have really relatively no appreciation for skating or tricks in skating, and then suddenly be a Sports Center highlight. That was crazy to me. It was definitely a turning point in my life in terms of not just personal recognition, but recognition for skateboarding. The best part, I don't know about the best part, but one of the perfect storm of all that was that our video game was to be released about 2 months later, 3 months later. So they were on the final version of it. They were about to submit it to Sony, actually, for approval. And I'll never forget, I woke up to an email from Joel Jewett, who's the president of Activision. He's not president of Activision, of Neversoft. He's eccentric. He's awesome. And the subject line was, "You fucking rule." And then they just wrote like 900. And then I replied and said, "Yeah, that was crazy. I wonder how, like, maybe we should try to get that in the game." And he immediately replied to me, "Already ahead of you." And so after that, our game was released, obviously to really great accolades, not because of my 900, but just because the game was really that playable, that replayable, and it represented skateboarding well. And obviously we had quite a run with that. There were, I don't know, 14 incarnations on consoles and all kinds of handheld and phone, and you know, at some point it passed $1 billion in sales and definitely changed my life completely. It allowed me to, well, for one, it allowed me to stop competing, but also to explore other opportunities. For instance, we started a skate tour, the Boom Boom Huck Jam, and that was largely based on the awareness that we created with the video game. We were able to fill arenas with a show that included skateboarding, BMX, and motocross. And usually when those three things are in a show, it's actually a sideshow to the concert, to the Warped Tour, or it's the halftime show for some football game. And it allowed us to actually be front and center and to be the headliners. Through that, I got a lot of crazy corporate endorsements. I was doing stuff for McDonald's. I was doing stuff for Frito-Lay. And I was able to use their marketing campaigns, their marketing dollars, to actually promote skateboarding. The thing I had to fight for the most during those days was not creative control, but final approvals. That was the hardest thing to convince people that I should be able to approve anything with my name or likeness. And I think that's when I realized that I had literally become a brand, because I had to have that quality control. And it was hard. You know, you're talking to Frito-Lay and some huge marketing agency, and they're like, "You don't know what you're talking about. We do this for a living." And I was like, "Yeah, but you don't represent skateboarding for a living. And I want to do it authentically." And I think because of the success of the video game, that sort of turned that turned the corner, and that allowed me to keep that final approval and to keep the image and likeness authentic. But then I got the second wave of haters, because then I was a sellout. And I'd already been through this first wave of people literally saying these nasty things to my face or in print. And so when people started claiming sellout, I was like, you guys, when I was 14, when I turned pro, if they had offered me a McDonald's sponsorship, I would have taken it in a heartbeat. I would have, you know, any of these things I would have gladly done, but no one, and this sounds super cliche, but basically they don't call you a sellout until your stuff sells. And it was selling out, and I was hyped. And I understand that can corrode your values, and that can change your attitude. But for me, it never changed the reason why I skated or anything that I had stood for. If anything, it just allowed me to do it more and to do it better, because I didn't have to scrape by to make ends meet. With all that success, I started to realize I did have a voice that could affect change, and I started seeing skate parks, not a lot of skate parks, but a few skate parks start to open up in more affluent areas and in these areas where the city council decided that they're going to be cool and they had the funding and they would design a park and they would actually, the one time in particular, I got paid to go to the skate park opening. I should have taken that as a warning firstly, but they paid me to go to the skate park opening just outside of Chicago, and it was a bunch of the city council members. They were much older, they were very much not skating. And I got there the night before and they said, do you want to check out the park before we open it tomorrow? And I said, oh yeah, sure. And so they drove me up. They literally lit the park with the headlights of their cars. And I hopped the fence, which made me feel like a skater finally again. And I skated it, and it was designed so badly that it was like you would have to have taken a video game and just chopped it all up to figure out how they even came up with these designs. So basically there'd be a set of stairs and then a wall. And then a pyramid with another wall over here. And all of the ledges were this high. So if you were to actually go and board slide them, your wheels would drag on the sides. So it was just bad. And I'm skating around. I did my best. And then finally, I came back to the car and they said, "What'd you think? What'd you think?" And I said, "Honestly, it's really badly designed. It's not well built. Clearly, you didn't consult any skaters on this project." And they said, and I said, "So I don't think it's very good." And they said, "Oh, well, that's what the kids were saying, but we said, wait till Tony Hawk gets here and he'll show you how to ride it." And that, to me, that was enlightening, because I realized that the cities that were taking the chance to build skate parks, they weren't consulting the skaters. They were just doing it to pat themselves on the back, that we're cool, we're building skate parks. And then they would get the bid from a sidewalk contractor because they had the lowest cost. And the sidewalk, this park, literally, I don't know if you guys know what a snake run is, but a snake run is when you have these sort of banks that go wind through and you can jump over the hips. Their snake run was a winding sidewalk. And so I realized like this can't go on like this, and I decided I wanted to do something about it. I didn't know what, and I said I want to start a foundation that can bridge this gap between the kids they're trying to provide for and the cities that are providing them, but mostly to direct that funding and those efforts into the more low-income areas where the kids are truly feeling disenfranchised and are discouraged from skating when they finally find something they love, and the authorities are telling them they can't do it. They're only going to go find something more subversive. So I got invited to do Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Celebrity Sports Edition around that time. And they said, what charity do you want your money to go to if you win? And that's when we started the foundation. That was it. I said, well, I'm going to start the foundation. Now, it could have gone horribly wrong, but luckily I had my brother who was my lifeline, and I called him with a Hemingway quote because he has a degree in journalism. And this was, it was 2001, and this is right when online searches started happening. But I called him because I thought he's got the answer. He's journalism. He's a journalist. He's the editor. He was the editor of Surfer Magazine for a while. And as soon as I started reading the question, I could hear him typing. And my first thought was, we're not going to get it. I can't. How do you not know a Hemingway quote? But he had been practicing using Google. I'll never forget this. That's really when I learned how quickly and how effective Google was at the time. And I know this probably doesn't. This is just normal now, but it was at the time an epiphany. And he started typing, and then he said, "Oh yeah, Huckleberry Finn. Got it. Yes, it's Huckleberry Finn. Yes." And I said, "Are you sure?" "Yes." And he said, because every hit was Huckleberry Finn. And so we won $125,000, and that was the seed money for the foundation. Since then, we've learned to be very effective with our money. We've given away over $7 million, helped to fund over 600 skate parks now. And we have an international, thank you. Our model is to help communities that want to help themselves. So basically, if a community is trying to get a skate park, we give them the guidebook on how to get it done. We give them funding, but mostly we give them the endorsement that they need, usually to cut through all that red tape. And it's the work I'm most proud of. We have an international outreach through Skateistan, so we've funded projects in South Africa and in Cambodia, soon in Jordan. And I know that all sounds crazy that there would be skating in any of these places, but in 2 years, skateboarding will be in the Olympics. And I feel like I have mixed emotions about that because I'm definitely trying to help usher it in the most authentic way. But at the same time, there's part of me that's like, we were always skating because we didn't like all these organized sports. We were doing this because it set us apart. And now we're fitting into their mold. So there's a part of me that feels like skateboarding, the Olympics need skateboarding more than skateboarding needs their validation. They need that cool factor in their summer games, the way that they got it with snowboarding in their winter games. But at the same time, it does give us opportunity to be on a stage that we've never, a stage unlike we've ever been on, and to promote skating on a global scale. And so in places like Jordan and in places like Cambodia, in Ethiopia, they're going to have skate teams. And to me, that is the beautiful silver lining of being on such a mainstream stage. So I'm a little bit torn, but at the same time, I want to see it done right. So I'm giving all my effort, as much effort as I can to making that happen. And I think, so at this point, I'll be 52, so I'm in training. No. No, but truly, the idea that I still get to skate for a living is beyond any dream I ever imagined. And you know, when people say like, "Is this the dream? Is this what you like?" This was never a dream. If anything, we were creating the dream and still creating it in terms of how far can you go with it? At what age can you still do it and be relevant or still enjoy it? I don't really know. I feel like if I start sucking at it, I'll do it less in public. But you're going to see me on my ramp here in about 45 minutes. So I hope you enjoy, and you'll see that, yeah, I'd slow down a little bit, but I've actually I've morphed my techniques into stuff that's more low impact and a little more technical, and it's allowed me to keep skating into my 50s. So I'm really proud to say that I'm still a pro skater, and I feel like, you know, creating the dream is very much like what Twilio's doing, offering you with their tools. And I didn't mean for this to turn to a pitch, but I feel like there are parallels there in that the tools are here, the technology is here. Like, this is the new generation, and they're allowing you to have the tools to create these dreams, to make reality things that you only imagined. And that's exactly where we are in skateboarding. Like, the idea that this is something that people of adult age appreciate, that any kid on the street understands what a kickflip is. Like, that's insane to me. When I was doing that, when I was doing kickflips, when I was 16, people just thought I was twirling a baton or a toy. Like, it was a joke. So I'm hugely proud of how far we've come and how skating has permeated so much of our culture, but mostly just proud to keep doing it. So I appreciate you all listening to me, hear me go on and on about my career, and if nothing else, don't listen to the haters, and follow your passion and keep control of your brand. I'm sure a lot of people can identify with that these days. If one thing I learned through all this is that if you give someone else control of your brand, or you allow them any sort of leeway for promoting what you're doing, it's never going to be what you wanted it to be. It's never, not going to be something you're proud of. And so with the third wave of haters, I like to say, I learned through social media that luckily I was set up for that flack, because it's rough out there. But you don't listen to the noise, and if nothing else, just believe in what you're doing, because if you're doing what you love for a living, to me, that's success. Even if it's not the most financially successful thing you can do, you're going to love going to work. And I love going to work. Like, I love going to skate. I love talking about skateboarding. I never imagined that anyone would pay me to do either one. And now they pay me more than I ever imagined. So thanks, Twilio. And thanks, everyone. And if you guys are out there, if we go out to the ramp, I'll take requests. Just yell them out to me, all right? No 900s today, though, sorry.